Did your family walk on eggshells or explode without warning?
You know those family gatherings where the air hangs heavy with the scent of charcoal-grilled burgers mingling with the faint floral notes from centerpieces that someone fussed over for hours, and everyone circles like sharks in a kiddie pool, exchanging smiles that barely mask the undercurrents of judgment and comparison, especially when the spotlight falls unevenly on siblings whose paths have diverged so sharply that one seems perpetually bathed in golden light while the other navigates shadows cast by unspoken expectations, and there I stood in the midst of my sister Lisa's engagement party. The backyard of our family home in suburban Chicago transformed into a makeshift wonderland with string lights twinkling against the encroaching dusk and laughter bubbling up from clusters of relatives who had arrived early to stake their claims on the best folding chairs near the dessert table, when the first insidious whisper about my so-called made-up fiancé sliced through the chatter like a dull knife through overcooked steak, prompting me to grip my plastic cup of spiked punch a little tighter while I pretended to adjust the hem of my simple sundress that I'd chosen precisely because it wouldn't draw attention away from Lisa's elegant lace gown but still allowed me to feel somewhat put together amid the chaos of this event that was supposed to celebrate her milestone yet somehow always circled back to scrutinizing mine. My name is Emily Harper, a 38-year-old marketing consultant who has spent the better part of the last decade building a career that involves jetting off to conferences in cities like Seattle and Miami where I negotiate deals over lukewarm coffee and late-night emails, only to return to an apartment filled with takeout containers and the quiet satisfaction of independence that my family interprets as loneliness, particularly when compared to Lisa, my younger sister by 6 years who at 32 has parlayed her art degree into a thriving social media presence filled with sponsored posts about home decor and wellness retreats, culminating now in her engagement to Mark, a reliable accountant with a neatly trimmed beard and a penchant for color-coded spreadsheets that represent the stability our parents always wished I'd chase instead of what they call my nomadic lifestyle. I had let the mention of my fiancé slip during a tense family dinner 6 months earlier, right after Mom had gushed for the umpteenth time about Lisa's ring, a sparkling 1-carat diamond that caught every ray of light like it was auditioning for a jewelry ad. And in a moment of defensiveness born from years of being the reliable but uncelebrated older sister, I casually introduced Alex as the man who'd entered my life during a professional trip to San Francisco, describing him in vague terms as someone successful in tech who valued discretion above all else, a detail I hoped would deter the inevitable barrage of questions, but instead ignited a spark of doubt that has smoldered ever since, fanned by relatives like Aunt Karen who, with her perfectly coiffed hair and a voice honed from decades of neighborhood gossip, now leaned conspiratorially toward cousin Jenny near the punch bowl and murmured just loud enough for me to overhear that it all sounded too convenient, too polished to be anything but a fabrication designed to spare me the embarrassment of attending yet another family event without a partner on my arm. If you'd asked me a year ago whether I'd ever orchestrate a response to their skepticism that involved something as dramatic as a private helicopter descending from the clouds to deliver not just proof, but a living, breathing testament to my reality, I would have dismissed it as the stuff of those over-the-top reality TV shows that play on late-night cable, the kind where underdogs finally get their comeuppance after enduring seasons of snide remarks and eye rolls, but life has a way of scripting its own twists, especially when you've met someone like Alex Thorne, whose world of boardrooms overlooking the Pacific and quiet philanthropy operates on a level so removed from the everyday rhythms of Midwestern barbecues and PTA meetings that revealing it prematurely felt like inviting a tornado into a dollhouse. So I chose instead to smile through the initial jabs at that holiday gathering where Dad had chuckled indulgently and patted my hand, saying it sounded wonderful but perhaps a bit too storybook for someone as practical as me, a comment that landed like a gentle pat on the head reserved for the child who dreams too big while her sibling quietly excels in the expected ways. As the party unfolded around me with caterers weaving through the guests bearing trays laden with sliders topped with caramelized onions and deviled eggs dusted with paprika that evoked memories of childhood summers spent in this very yard chasing fireflies until the streetlights hummed to life, I navigated the social minefield by nodding along to Grandma's reminiscences about her own engagement back in the 1950s, a time when whirlwind courtships led to lifelong unions without the complications of modern dating apps and privacy concerns. All while my peripheral vision caught the sidelong glances from Uncle Bob, who earlier in the week had texted the family group chat a joke about my phantom fiancé being as real as his chances of winning the lottery. A quip that drew laughing emojis from nearly everyone except me, because laughing would have meant conceding ground in a battle I'd been fighting subtly for years against the narrative that positioned Lisa as the achiever who'd snagged happiness while I remained the workaholic destined for spinsterhood. Part of the reason I'd kept Alex's details under wraps stemmed from the practicalities of his life, where a single leaked photo could derail negotiations worth millions or attract the kind of attention from extended family that turns personal milestones into public spectacles, but another layer involved my own reluctance to invite the scrutiny that would inevitably follow. The questions about timelines and compatibility that had plagued Lisa's relationships in the past and now loomed over her engagement like a faint cloud on an otherwise sunny horizon. Especially since I'd overheard her confiding to Mom just last week about Mark's hesitancy regarding the wedding budget, a vulnerability she masked with her radiant smiles, but that echoed the isolation I felt in defending a love that existed very much in reality, evidenced by the simple gold band he had slipped onto my finger during a sunset walk along the beach in Malibu. Far from the judgmental eyes that now assess me over plates of potato salad laced with just the right amount of mustard. I could have confronted the whispers head-on right there amid the rising hum of conversation as more guests arrived, pulling Aunt Karen aside to detail the quiet evenings Alex and I shared discussing everything from market trends to our favorite obscure podcasts, or showing them the photo on my phone of us at a low-key vineyard in Napa where his laughter had cut through the vines like sunlight. But I opted for the path of calculated patience, allowing their assumptions to build like storm clouds because the satisfaction of their eventual surprise would carry more weight than any verbal sparring, a strategy born from countless boardroom experiences where timing often trumped volume in sealing the deal. Yet as Lisa drew me into a side conversation near the photo booth adorned with props that screamed forced fun, from oversized hearts to feather boas that clashed hilariously with the elegant theme, she hugged me with an enthusiasm that bordered on overcompensation and whispered that the family was just concerned about my happiness, implying with every syllable that my single status painted a picture of quiet desperation rather than chosen solitude. A sentiment that twisted in my chest like a knot I couldn't quite untie because it came from a place of love tangled with pity. The kind that made me question for a fleeting moment whether inviting Alex to make this grand entrance was an act of empowerment or merely a desperate bid for validation from people whose opinions shouldn't matter as much as they still did. I reassured her with a light laugh that everything was fine, that my life held its own brand of fulfillment away from the glare of engagements and white dresses, but as I stepped back into the fray, the volume of the whispers swelled, culminating in Uncle Bob's booming voice cutting through the playlist of classic Motown hits as he called out to the group with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, asking if my elusive fiancé had finally decided to grace us with his presence or if this was destined to be another evening of tall tales from the sister who always seemed to have one foot out the door, and in that instant, with every pair of eyes swiveling toward me like spotlights in an interrogation room, I held my smile steady, the facade cracking just enough internally to fuel the anticipation of what was to come, leaving the air thick with unspoken challenges that promised the night was far from over. The weeks leading up to Lisa's engagement party stretched out like an endless ribbon of anticipation laced with the kind of quiet dread that settles in when you know a confrontation is brewing, but you've chosen to meet it on your own terms rather than letting it ambush you in the midst of everyday routines, and I found myself immersed in preparations that went beyond selecting the right pair of earrings to complement my outfit, delving instead into reflections on the years of subtle erosions to my self-image that my family had inflicted through offhand comments about my choice to prioritize career over hearth and home, all while I unpacked the small luxuries Alex had sent as tokens of his support, like the exquisite leather-bound notebook that arrived unannounced one rainy afternoon. its pages crisp and inviting, as if promising to capture not just my professional notes, but the unspoken frustrations I harbored toward relatives who viewed my independence as a flaw rather than a feature. In the confines of my Northside Chicago apartment, where the windows overlooked a bustling street alive with the honks of delivery trucks and the chatter of pedestrians hurrying to their own lives, I sifted through memories of past family gatherings that had always highlighted the chasm between Lisa's effortless charm and my more measured presence, such as the Thanksgiving 3 years prior when she'd unveiled her latest influencer collaboration with a lifestyle brand, complete with swag bags, overflowing with scented candles and artisanal soaps that drew oohs and ahs from everyone, while I shared a modest update about closing a major client account only to receive polite nods followed by Uncle Bob's booming suggestion that I might find more fulfillment in settling down like my sister, a remark that lingered like the aftertaste of overbrewed coffee, bitter and hard to wash away even as I drove home that night, replaying it in my mind and wondering why their approval still held such sway despite the successes I'd carved out in boardrooms far removed from the comfort of suburban potlucks. Alex had entered my life like a steady current cutting through turbulent waters during that San Francisco conference 18 months ago, where amid the sterile hum of presentation halls filled with charts on emerging tech trends, we'd connected over shared exhaustion with the corporate facade, him admitting in a quiet corner cafe that he built his empire on intuition rather than flash, a philosophy that mirrored my own approach to marketing strategies that emphasized authenticity over hype. And from there our relationship blossomed in stolen moments away from prying eyes, weekends in secluded coastal towns where we'd walk hand in hand along fog-shrouded beaches discussing everything from the pressures of his latest venture capital rounds to my dreams of one day launching a consultancy that empowered women overlooked in male-dominated industries, bonds strengthened by his understanding that revealing our connection to my family too soon would invite a flood of expectations he wasn't ready to navigate. As the party date inched closer, marked by calendar alerts on my phone that synced seamlessly with the high-end smartwatch he'd gifted me for my birthday, a sleek device that tracked not just steps, but the subtle rhythms of a life balancing ambition and affection, I wrestled with the temptation to share glimpses of this reality, perhaps forwarding a photo from our last getaway to the family chat to preempt the whispers, but practicality won out because Alex's world operated under layers of non-disclosure agreements and media scrutiny that could turn a simple introduction into a tabloid footnote, so I settled for subtle clues like slipping on that bracelet during video calls with Mom, its delicate chain catching the light just enough to spark a question she dismissed as a flea market find, all while I chuckled inwardly at the irony of her underestimating the depth of my happiness in the same way she'd once dismissed my college scholarship as luck rather than hard work. The morning of the event dawned with a crisp autumn chill that nipped at my skin as I loaded my car with a bottle of wine for the toast and a tray of homemade brownies I'd baked the night before as my contribution to the potluck spread. A gesture that felt both nostalgic and obligatory given how Mom had emphasized the importance of everyone pitching in to make Lisa's day special, and as I pulled into the driveway of the family home, the sight of early arrivals already milling about in the backyard with coolers thumping against the grass and Dad firing up the grill with his usual enthusiasm for searing steaks to perfection, I braced myself for the inevitable shift in dynamics, where my arrival solo would reignite the narrative of Emily, the eternal bridesmaid in both literal and figurative senses. Lisa greeted me at the door with a hug that lingered a fraction too long, her excitement palpable in the way she gestured toward the archway of fresh flowers she'd arranged herself, petals in soft pinks and whites that evoked bridal magazines she'd pored over since high school. But beneath her glow I detected a flicker of uncertainty when she mentioned offhand that Mark had been buried in work lately, his responses to wedding planning texts growing shorter and more evasive. A revelation that she brushed off as pre-wedding jitters, but that resonated with me as a parallel to my own guarded disclosures, making me wonder if her perfect facade hid stresses similar to those I'd chosen to shield from the group's judgmental lens. As the afternoon unfolded with relatives trickling in and setting up tables laden with casseroles bubbling with cheese and ground beef alongside crisp salads tossed with vinaigrette that carried hints of summer herbs, The whispers began to weave through the conversations like threads in a fraying tapestry. Cousin Jenny sidling up to me near the grill with a plate balanced precariously in her hand and a mischievous glint in her eye as she inquired whether my mysterious Alex had finally materialized or if he remained confined to the realm of creative storytelling. Her tone light, but probing enough to draw nods from nearby aunts who paused in their chatter about neighborhood scandals to await my response, and I countered with a casual remark about surprises being the spice of life, drawing a few chuckles that masked the underlying tension but did little to quell the growing undercurrent of doubt that painted me as the fabricator desperate for relevance. Uncle Bob contributed to the chorus soon after, his voice carrying over the sizzle of burgers as he clapped me on the shoulder with a force that jostled my wine glass and declared that at my age it was high time to trade fantasies for facts. Much like Lisa had done in locking down Mark with his steady job and sensible plans, words that echoed the sentiments he'd voiced at every holiday since my divorce 5 years back, when he'd suggested I lower my standards to avoid ending up alone with nothing but a career to warm my bed. A perspective that ignored the fulfillment I derived from late-night strategy sessions that often led to breakthroughs more rewarding than any fleeting romance. Mom pulled me aside briefly amid the setup frenzy to confide her worries about my perpetual singledom, her eyes softening with that maternal concern laced with disappointment as she wondered aloud if I wasn't perhaps inventing this bow to sidestep the truth of my solitude. A conversation that twisted the knife of familial love into something sharper because it came from the woman who'd raised me to stand tall yet now seemed to measure my worth by the presence of a partner at my side, prompting me to reassure her with tales of Alex's thoughtfulness without specifics, all while my phone buzzed discreetly with a message from him confirming the evening's logistics, a lifeline that steadied me against the rising tide of scrutiny. As the sun climbed higher and cast long shadows across the lawn where children darted between legs chasing a stray balloon, the party's energy built toward the main festivities, but just as I thought I could navigate the afternoon with my armor intact, Aunt Karen approached with her signature blend of faux sympathy and sharp insight, cornering me by the punch bowl where the fruity aroma mingled with the faint tang of alcohol, and in a voice pitched low for intimacy yet loud enough for eavesdroppers, she placed a hand on my arm and expressed sorrow that I faced yet another milestone event unaccompanied, implying with every measured word that my life echoed with the hollowness of unfulfilled promises and solitary evenings stretching into an uncertain future. With the engagement party now fully ignited under the canopy of a deepening twilight sky where the first stars began to prick through the fading blue like hesitant witnesses to the unfolding drama, the backyard pulsed with the kind of orchestrated energy that only family events can muster, complete with the rhythmic clink of glasses raised in premature toasts and the savory aromas of grilled meats giving way to the sweeter notes of pies cooling on wire racks that Mom had arranged with her usual meticulous care, drawing me deeper into the swirl of interactions where every hug and handshake carried an underlayer of curiosity about my solitary status, amid the celebrations centered so squarely on Lisa's radiant union with Mark, whose arm draped possessively around her waist as they circulated like the unofficial king and queen of this suburban fate. I maneuvered through the growing throng with a practiced ease born from years of similar navigations, accepting compliments on my dress, a modest knee-length number in deep emerald that I'd selected for its flattering cut without veering into competition with Lisa's bridal-inspired ensemble, while deflecting the probing glances that lingered a beat too long on my bare ring finger. A detail that Aunt Karen had already weaponized in earlier whispers to suggest my tales of Alex served more as a shield against loneliness than a genuine romance, her words echoing in my mind like a persistent echo in an empty hallway even as I laughed along to Cousin Jenny's anecdote about a disastrous blind date that somehow pivoted back to pitying my own supposed romantic drought. The toasts commenced as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the lawn where guests had settled into clusters around picnic tables groaning under the weight of potato salads flecked with celery and hard-boiled eggs alongside corn on the cob glistening with butter that evoked the uncomplicated barbecues of my adolescence before sibling rivalry sharpened into something more pointed, and Dad took the microphone first, His voice gravelly from years of commanding attention at neighborhood associations, yet softening with pride as he lauded Mark for embodying the reliability that every father hopes to see in his daughter's partner. A stability he contrasted implicitly with my own peripatetic career that shuttled me between time zones without the anchor of commitment, prompting murmurs of agreement from the assembly that washed over me like a cool wave. Not quite submerging, but enough to make me grip my wine glass tighter while I forced a smile that masked the internal retort about how my independence had funded vacations they could only dream of. All without the mess of mismatched expectations that seemed to lurk beneath even the happiest engagements. Lisa's turn followed, her speech a bubbly cascade of gratitude laced with sisterly affection that she directed my way with a warm glance, but the undercurrent turned teasing when she quipped about how some of us needed to take notes on seizing love when it appeared, a line that drew chuckles from the relatives who'd been trading speculations about my fabricated fiancé all afternoon. Their laughter ringing hollow in my ears like the tinny applause after a poorly landed joke, yet I joined in with a light-hearted shrug that belied the dilemma churning within, wondering whether to interject with a preemptive reveal about Alex's impending arrival or hold the line and let the crescendo build to its natural peak, a choice that felt increasingly precarious as the evening's warmth amplified the sting of their collective doubt. My phone vibrated subtly in my pocket during a lull, a discreet buzz from Alex that sent a jolt of reassurance through me like a secret code in a crowded room. The message a simple update on his progress that hinted at the sophistication of his travel without spelling it out, a clue I tucked away even as Grandma sidled up beside me on a weathered bench, her arthritic hand patting my knee with the familiarity of generations as she leaned in to advise that it was past time I abandoned these daydreams of a perfect match and embrace the realities awaiting women of a certain age. Her counsel delivered with the gentle insistence of someone who'd navigated her own 1950s marriage through economic hardships and unspoken compromises, words that carried weight because they echoed the very fears I'd buried under layers of professional armor, making me question for a moment if my secrecy with Alex stemmed from strength or from a deeper reluctance to fully integrate my worlds. Mark's toast arrived next, delivered with a hesitancy that betrayed the cracks I'd glimpsed earlier in his interactions with Lisa. His words stumbling over thanks to the family for their support while his eyes darted away from hers just long enough to suggest the prenup discussions and financial anxieties she'd hinted at during our last coffee catch-up. A vulnerability that humanized him in my eyes, but also underscored the illusions we all maintained to keep the peace, much like my own veiled references to a partner who existed in flesh and blood yet remained invisible to this circle, prompting a fresh wave of whispers as the group dissected his brevity with knowing nods that soon circled back to my absence of a counterpart. As desserts made their rounds on platters adorned with doilies that fluttered in the breeze, cheesecakes layered with graham cracker crusts and fruit tarts bursting with seasonal berries, I fielded another round of inquiries from Uncle Bob, who cornered me near the dessert table with a half-eaten slice of pie in hand and a twinkle in his eye that masked sharper intent as he boomed about how Lisa's engagement proved that persistence paid off in love, implying with every syllable that my persistence in solitude bordered on stubborn folly, his commentary eliciting snickers from nearby cousins who piled on with tales of their own settled lives, turning the moment into an impromptu roast that left me standing there with a forkful of tart paused midway, the sweetness cloying against the bitterness rising in my throat. The internal conflict peaked then, with the fairy lights overhead twinkling like conspirators in the night as I debated slipping away to call Alex and accelerate the plan, or enduring the barrage a little longer to savor the impending reversal that would transform their amusement into astonishment, a revenge served not with venom, but with the quiet elegance of truth unveiled at the perfect juncture. Yet just as I formulated a witty deflection to Uncle Bob's latest jab about my elusive beau being more myth than man, a low rumble pierced the playlist of nostalgic ballads, growing from a distant hum into an unmistakable thrum that vibrated through the ground and lifted faces skyward, where a dark silhouette against the moonlit clouds descended with purposeful grace, the whir of blades scattering leaves across the grass as the party's laughter faltered into a collective hush, every eye fixed on the approaching spectacle that promised to shatter the evening's fragile equilibrium. The helicopter's descent carved through the night air with a precision that silenced the backyard's murmurs as effectively as a judge's gavel in a crowded courtroom, its sleek black form hovering momentarily before settling onto the adjacent field with a final whomp of rotors that sent a whirlwind of fallen leaves and stray napkins spiraling upward like startled confetti, drawing every gaze from the dessert tables where half-eaten slices of apple pie lay forgotten amid the sudden shift from casual revelry to wide-eyed anticipation that rippled through the assembly like a stone skipped across a still pond. I stood rooted near the edge of the patio, my heart pounding in rhythm with the fading engine hum as Alex emerged from the craft, his silhouette sharp against the landing lights that bathed the scene in an ethereal glow. Dressed in a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin tailored for red carpet galas rather than impromptu family barbecues, his steps measured and unhurried as he navigated the makeshift path through the open gate, carrying a polished leather valise that hinted at the thoughtful preparations we discussed over encrypted calls to ensure this entrance would resonate without overwhelming the evening's core celebration of Lisa's engagement. The family's reactions unfolded in layers of disbelief, Uncle Bob's beer sloshing over the rim of his bottle as he squinted into the darkness and muttered something about experimental drones or neighborhood pranksters, while Aunt Karen clutched her necklace with fingers that trembled slightly, her earlier smug assurances about my solitary delusions evaporating in the face of this tangible intrusion that demanded explanation without a single word spoken. And I allowed a small smile to curve my lips, savoring the reversal that transformed their skepticism into a collective pause heavy with unspoken questions about how the overlooked sister had orchestrated such a spectacle right under their noses. Alex reached the heart of the gathering with that innate poise honed from years of pitching multi-million-dollar ideas to skeptical investors, his eyes finding mine first in a gaze that conveyed volumes of shared resolve before he extended a hand to shake Dad's, introducing himself simply as Alex Thorne with a warmth that disarmed the initial wariness, and as he turned to embrace me lightly at the waist, his voice carried just enough volume for the nearest cluster to hear as he murmured, "My beautiful fiancé," in a tone laced with genuine affection that elevated the moment beyond mere drama into something profoundly affirming. The word fiancé, a deliberate choice to honor the boundaries I'd set while still claiming our bond publicly for the first time amid this circle of doubters. The revenge aspect unfolded with elegant subtlety as he opened the valise to distribute gifts selected with the precision of a strategist who had listened intently to my recountings of family quirks during our quiet dinners, overlooking city skylines, starting with Dad, who received a vintage pocket watch engraved with coordinates from the family homestead's latitude. A nod to his lifelong stories of Midwestern roots that prompted a gruff but touched acknowledgement from the man who'd once dismissed my ambitions as flights of fancy, followed by Uncle Bob unwrapping a set of leather-bound books on classic American autos that mirrored his garage obsessions, the gesture drawing a reluctant grin and a mumbled thanks that carried an undercurrent of chagrin for his earlier barbs about my imaginary suitor. Mom's eyes misted over as Alex presented her with a pearl-handled brooch reminiscent of the heirloom she'd lost years ago in a move, its luster catching the string lights and eliciting a hug that bridged the emotional gap her whispers had widened, while Lisa accepted a delicate silk scarf in shades of her favorite blues, patterned with subtle motifs from the Napa balloon ride where Mark had proposed, a detail I'd shared in passing that now made her flush with a mix of delight and dawning realization about how deeply Alex had tuned into our lives without ever setting foot here before. The charm offensive continued as he engaged the group with anecdotes that wove humor into the fabric of exposure, like lightly teasing cousin Jenny about her blind date disasters by gifting her a whimsical journal for mapping out the real deals, a quip that elicited laughter laced with self-reflection and diffused the tension without direct confrontation. Yet beneath the surface, I sensed the hypocrisies bubbling up, Aunt Karen's flustered compliments on his manners contrasting sharply with her prior pity and Mark's stiff posture beside Lisa betraying a flicker of envy that his own steady but unflashy arrival paled in comparison. a dynamic that amplified the witty satisfaction of seeing their narratives appended by evidence they couldn't dismiss as fabrication. As the party recalibrated around this new center of gravity with questions flowing like the wine that circulated freely, Alex fielded them with grace, sharing just enough about our meeting at that San Francisco conference to paint me as the captivating professional who'd captured his attention amid a sea of executives. Details that highlighted my agency in a way that countered years of being typecast as the workaholic sibling, and I joined in with light commentary that poked fun at the absurdity of their doubts, remarking how some secrets were worth keeping to avoid turning love into a family committee project, drawing nods and chuckles that masked the underlying shifts in power. Yet, even as the applause for Lisa and Mark resumed with renewed vigor, a twist of introspection gripped me during a brief aside with Alex near the grill, where he confessed the effort he'd gone to for this gesture stemmed from his desire to honor the woman who'd grounded his high-flying existence, words that warmed me profoundly, but also stirred a quiet doubt about whether this grand reveal mended the familial fractures or merely papered over them with spectacle, especially as I caught Lisa's gaze lingering on us with an expression that blended admiration and a hint of resentment for the spotlight's swing. The evening's momentum built toward closure with guests milling in animated clusters, but just as I believed the night's objectives had been met without further upheaval, Mom signaled me discreetly from the kitchen doorway, her face etched with a complexity of emotions that suggested the gifts had unlocked not just surprise, but a deeper reckoning, pulling me aside for a conversation that loomed like the shadow of unresolved histories ready to spill forth in the quiet aftermath. The kitchen's fluorescent light buzzed overhead like a persistent insect as Mom closed the door behind us with a soft click that sealed off the backyard's renewed chatter, her posture rigid with the kind of restrained intensity that had always marked her interventions during family tensions. Whether over holiday meal disputes or the deeper undercurrents of disappointment she'd harbored since my divorce turned what should have been a fresh start into a cautionary tale she referenced in subtle ways during conversations about Lisa's prospects, and now she whirled to face me with eyes narrowed in a blend of hurt and accusation, demanding in a voice that trembled along the edges why I'd concealed Alex from them for so long, as if our lives were separate realms unworthy of intersection, implying that my secrecy not only robbed her of the joy in her eldest daughter's happiness, but also cast me as the architect of division in a family already strained by years of favoring Lisa's visible achievements over my quieter victories in professional arenas far removed from suburban validation. I leaned against the worn countertop where countless batches of cookies had cooled on newsprint during my childhood summers, explaining with measured words how Alex's existence in the high-stakes world of tech mergers demanded discretion to shield us both from the opportunistic eyes that could exploit personal details for corporate leverage. Yet she countered sharply that this rationale felt like an excuse layered over a reluctance to fully embrace the familial fold, her words slicing through the air heavy with the scent of lingering roast beef and cooling pies, forcing me to confront the truth that my choices had indeed isolated me further. A dilemma that resonated uncomfortably because it echoed the very doubts I'd endured silently at the party's outset, making me wonder if viewers of this unfolding saga would side with her plea for transparency or defend my guarded heart as a necessary armor against their judgments. We re-emerged into the night where the string lights cast a golden haze over the dispersing guests, Alex holding court near the fire pit with tales that wove seamlessly between his entrepreneurial exploits and the ways I'd inspired his latest philanthropy initiative focused on women's education grants. A narrative that drew admiring nods from Dad, who now fiddled with the pocket watch's chain as if it anchored him to this newfound respect, his earlier implicit comparisons during the toasts dissolving into genuine inquiries about my role in Alex's ventures that highlighted the substance behind the spectacle. Lisa intercepted me shortly after, her expression a mosaic of elation and unease as she confessed in hushed tones that Mark's recent withdrawals amid prenup negotiations had left her questioning the solidity of her own foundation. A vulnerability she'd masked behind her engagement glow, but that now surfaced in the wake of my revelation. Admitting with a wry twist of her lips that my dramatic entrance had inadvertently spotlighted the fragility in her fairy tale. A twist that humanized her in my eyes yet stirred a pang of empathy laced with the ironic satisfaction of seeing the golden child glimpse the shadows I'd navigated for years, prompting me to share a gentle reassurance about love's imperfections without delving into the costs of my secrecy that might have alienated us sooner. The final toast circled back to the couple of the hour, but with an undercurrent shifted toward inclusivity as Uncle Bob raised his glass to unexpected arrivals and the surprises life reserves for those patient enough to wait. His words carrying a humbled tone that acknowledged the folly of his earlier jests about my phantom partner, while Aunt Karen, prompted by the journal's blank pages, offered a tentative apology wrapped in compliments on Alex's generosity, her light vulgarity slipping threw in a muttered aside about how she'd underestimated the whole damn package, drawing scattered laughs that eased the lingering hypocrisies without erasing them entirely, and I contributed a quip about families being like fine wine, better with age and a bit of aeration to reveal the true bouquet. A witty closure that satisfied the revenge arc by exposing their assumptions through reflection rather than recrimination. As the evening wound toward its close with hugs exchanged under the cooling autumn air and the helicopter's silhouette looming in the distance, like a sentinel of possibilities, Alex drew me close amid the farewells, his breath warm against my ear as he affirmed our bond with a soft repetition of how I'd become the steady force in his whirlwind existence. Yet in that intimate moment he let slip a subtle clue about the merger's implications, mentioning casually that success might necessitate a relocation to the West Coast within months, pulling us toward horizons that distanced us from this tangled web of roots and rivalries, a hint that planted seeds of ambiguity about whether our triumph tonight fortified our future or merely delayed the inevitable strains of diverging lives. The party lights dimmed one by one as guests departed in a convoy of minivans and sedans, leaving behind echoes of transformed dynamics, where Lisa's admiring glance lingered with unspoken questions about sisterly parallels, and Dad's pat on Alex's shoulder sealed a tentative alliance born from the gift's thoughtful precision. But as I watched the rotors spin up for his departure, waving from the driveway with the family clustered in awkward solidarity, a hollow introspection settled over me, because while the whispers had silenced into awe and my clever orchestration delivered a satisfying reversal that mended surface cracks, the deeper query persisted about whether hiding Alex had protected our love or starved it of the nourishment that shared vulnerabilities provide, leaving me to drive home alone through rain-slicked streets pondering if this grand gesture heralded unbreakable unity or served as a poignant farewell to the familiar chaos. An open-ended reverie that invited contemplation on the delicate balance between secrecy's safety and revelation's risks in the intricate dance of family and fortune.